Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're good. I'm Jack Chew. This is Chewing It Over, Mondays and Thursdays, 12:30 till 1 o'clock, most of the time, although that has been a little bit sporadic because I've been on my jollies and we had a couple of guests that pulled out last minute. None of them because of heat exhaustion yet, but that's the latest excuse I'm expecting. Fortunately, not today, though. Our guest is waiting patiently in our virtual waiting room. Hope he's not making a mess. Really got some great shows coming up for you, including this one with Matt, but also we've got Joe Elphiston coming on the show as well. I noticed on the chat today, so that's one to look forward to for next week. I've also, and I've been talking about doing this for a while. I've actually updated this frame thing, so it now says Mondays and Thursdays. So can you believe it? How many weeks of saying I've finally sorted out that for the infrastructure? So it seems we're all right. Point surprises for whoever on the chat lets me know that things are coming through loud and clear. Always helpful to know that that's working tech wise. But I will proceed as if it is, and we'll get stuck into this week's show. Now, Matt Murray Downing, I've worked with him for quite a while, and we'll talk about his career journey. That's what he's here to do. But yeah, certainly one of my favourite people in the industry for various reasons. But one of them being that we're just good mates. Like we bumped into each other a number of years ago in interesting circumstances where he was an enthused and keen student, and now he's part of our Physio Matters team, and someone that I wish we were. I think he's one of them where if geography wasn't against us, then I certainly see more of him, and someone that I get on really well with. So it's been an absolute pleasure to see his career go from strength to strength and be as interesting as he is as a person. And so it's been great to get him on the show to chat about that today, and I'm sure you'll be really interested in his journey so far. So without further ado, hopefully a couple of clicks. Let's get rid of my little frame first, and then. Matt, can you hear me?
Hello, mate. Yes, thank you very much.
Brilliant. No, that's great. Thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, mate. No, thanks for having us. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. So the sort of thing we really want to get stuck into, and you've been kind of off requested guest in a way on this show recently because you have a interesting portfolio career and have done fairly early in your career, but then also more recently into motorsport is particularly unique. So we won't rush to the end. Can you just start off by just introducing yourself for the listeners and tell them a bit about your career journey so far?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of myself, I graduated in 2017 from the University of East Anglia. Along that journey, I know, Jack, you kind of hinted a little bit. I'd already been working with you guys over Physio Matters, which was great in terms of exposing me, I think, at the early phases into kind of a lot of people in perhaps slightly higher positions in the physio world and various things around that was very useful when I did then graduate. From there, kind of went into NHS practice, MSK specifically, and I was quite fortunate, really, just to get picked up by a few people who were quite keen for me to kind of have some mentorship programs with them and kind of work underneath them and kind of be guided up a little bit, I guess, with some of my MSK practice. I'd always had my foot in the door of sport in the sense of my elective placement was with Norwich City. I then did 2 seasons working with them alongside my NHS practice. So kind of had that foot in the door of the sport, as we say. From football, kind of then moved across to gymnastics. I was very fortunate at that stage in my career, maybe sort of a year or so in, to be in a private practice in Chelmsford, where one of my very good friends and colleagues, Brad Scanes, so we kind of tag teamed a little bit on the gymnastics work with the British gymnastics team, and we kind of led that up to the last Olympics. So that was 2 or 3 years in the making, really. So that was excellent. And then from there, again, I probably then moved much more into the private sector, kind of started to step away from my NHS work and focus a little bit more on my private work and my sport work. And then for the last 2 seasons, as I say, then got taken on board with working with one of the Red Bull juniors, supporting his development through Formula 3 into Formula 2. So that's been brilliant. So that takes me to today, really.
Yeah, fantastic, and all the associated jet setting that's involved in that. So yeah, you'll be more used to this heat than we are from your foreign travels recently. But yeah, it's been a really interesting 5 years of your career. Obviously, I've known you a little longer than that, but I think one of the things that's interesting about your reflections on it, when I think about the timeline and how it intersected with us, is that you think about when we met you 2016, you graduate 2017, and we were working as sort of students and new graduates and you were helping us keep in with the cool kids as you certainly are, of course, and still are. But it was also then, if you think about it, 2018 is when we first did the big R's. And so, we thrust you, Tom Jess, and George Goodwin into some Physio Matters team working and leading roundtable discussions with some of the best and brightest and stuff. And one of the reasons for that, because we certainly trusted you with it, but also the opportunity for some of that to rub off and for some of the contacts and networking, but also for you guys to see the big picture, but also zoom in sometimes clinically and to sharpen your reasoning. The hope was that you'd all go from strength to strength, and you have. I mean, that just cannot be a coincidence. There's a selection pressure for you applying to join us, but also all three of your careers have been phenomenal to watch, and certainly more advanced in your technical skill, reasoning, etc., clinically, but also in terms of seeing that big picture and having multifaceted roles and applying leadership where appropriate. That's the thing that in your 5 years there or thereabouts that you've been qualified is a cut above. How much do you think that? Because if put to me, because often people ask me what they should do, you guys are examples that I often point them to, because you got stuck in, like you really did. There were very few things, even when you were a bit uncomfortable, you did say yes. You made sure you weren't overexposed, left vulnerable, but you did just get stuck into stuff, and we noticed that straight away. Is that the approach that you consciously took, or was it just natural to you? Like, where was that?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both, to be honest, Jack. I mean, I think in the first place, I think to put myself out there a little bit when I was perhaps more of a student, definitely, I think was a bit of my nature in terms of being a bit of an extrovert, I guess, and going out there and mixing with, willing to have chats with people a bit higher up than myself. I think you're absolutely right, though. I think where it became really useful was with you guys, was me, Tom, George, etc. Kind of, you're right, got thrown in at the deep end so many times. And as much as which was phenomenal. And I think it got to the point where I think you're right, from a clinical reasoning and from a physical point of view, you just had to step up a little bit. And I think it put a good amount of pressure on, in the sense of, you're going to mix with these people. The amount of times we did the big R's and you've got, a leading knee expert, and you think, I'm going to have to ask this guy a few questions. And if I don't know my stuff, I'm going to look a bit of an idiot. So I think probably a combination. I think there's definitely a few personality traits in there that probably push me in the right direction. But I think then there comes a realization that you've really got to make sure you're prepared enough, and you can back up that knowledge base a little bit when it comes to talking and meeting these individuals, to show a little bit of substance. So definitely, I think that initial part of my career hugely helped me develop in the kind of latter stages. And also, I think just how willing these people are to, how approachable they are, and how they want to have conversations. I think that's huge as well, because I think a lot of the times I've gone into services or companies, and you think perhaps the person at the top doesn't want to have a chat, or think, oh, they don't want to bother themselves with me, but actually you start to learn they really do. So it's just having, I think, a bit about you to kind of go and have that conversation.
That's a really good point. People match your enthusiasm, and you go to it respectfully, and you always did, and others that are like you have done similarly, where respectful and appreciative of time, and don't abuse it. But similarly, like, it is contagious. You guys are asking the right questions, and so it is really quite a pleasure to work with that. Did you? Because I remember a conversation with you just as you were coming towards the twilight of your student time, and you were torn as many were about whether or not to specialize early in MSK. How much should you do? And you, I remember grappling with that with you, and you decided to be pretty MSK centric from the off, and we talked about how to mitigate those risks, etc. But any regrets in that direction at all? Like, when you look back over that, you did specialize early, and that has, some people would argue, has consequences.
Yeah, I think no regrets, definitely not. I think I did the right route for me. And I think I was also very fortunate with my clinical experiences as a student. I think abnormally so. I mean, I had such a broad mix of stuff when it comes to all the different areas. Not saying it remotely compares to necessarily doing rotations, but I think it gave me enough that gave me a really good, solid knowledge base. And I was very aware that I perhaps needed to work that a bit harder to make sure I had covered a bit more ground kind of medically, and kind of covering my knowledge base on that front. So I don't regret it, but then I wouldn't necessarily say I recommend it for everyone. If I have chats with students now, I don't necessarily say that's the right route. For some it may be, if they've been as fortunate I have perhaps with the clinical placements. But yeah, so no regrets. I think it was the right decision for me. Yeah, I stand by that. But I think, perhaps not for everyone. And I think it kind of highlights that thing with physio, which I think is probably the downside of the profession sometimes, is there's not one route. And I think sometimes we do get funneled into it a little bit, but I think there's so many different ways of doing it. But you have to understand yourself and understand maybe where you want to go a little bit.
I did a Chewing It Over episode a number of months ago where it was saying, should you just do your rotations? And one of the things that I highlighted in that sentence was just like there's something that's like made to seem obligatory. Like, of course you could and you should, and there's all sorts of things that may be, but it's that this idea of that being the default needed interrogating more carefully than people were doing. And you're a good example of that, and we have many. What is interesting about that though is that people do make that decision and specialize in something like MSK, but then they still perhaps end up in some sort of more typical trajectory with regards to, say, NHS and private practice, where they are in a clinic room, gym environment perhaps, but they are seeing people with their sore bits in a more typical environment. Yours has intersected with elite sport as you have, but also you've always had your finger in a few different pies. You have had a portfolio career pretty young into your tenure. Was that always intentional, or is that again? Are you a kid in a sweet shop?
Good question. Um, Definitely intentional. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think I've always been someone who enjoys having different projects, and I've always really enjoyed. I mean, particularly when I moved into private practice, I think one of the things I realised quite early on was I generally have two streams of work. So I had NHS and private for a while. Then I moved into fully private and had two different streams of private work. Did a bit of work for Pure in London, and also then in Chelmsford. So I think it was on purpose. I think it kept my work really varied, and I started to realise that I like to have that variety of work.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely think there was a little bit of purpose into me kind of doing that. That being said, the later I get into my career, I do the sort of more I move forward, it's learning to say no as well. I do think there was definitely a point in the first few years where I was just, I took as much as I could, and I did as much as possible just to try and expose myself to as much as possible. And again, I think it comes back to, if someone said to me, should I do that? I do think it's good to do that, but I still think, again, you have to. It's about kind of analysing yourself and knowing if it's right for you. I knew I was someone who, if I got to breaking point, I could put my hands up and go, look, I need to back off. But also knew I wasn't scared of a bit of hard work, and knew that for me that was probably the best way to drive me forward a little bit, was to put myself under a little bit of pressure time wise.
Gotcha. How old are you now?
I am about to turn 26 in 2 weeks.
And
27,
and
sorry,
so
27 in 2 weeks.
I
Yeah.
only ask as a means of saying that I know from my experience. Feel free to say if yours is different, but I suspect it's not. And I think we have talked about this over a beer before. Is that's relevant too, isn't it? Like when should you live fast if not in your 20s? And that if your career is such and you're versatile enough, and your career is versatile enough to then try to couple those things, and especially we'll come on to some of the travel aspects that I've sort of alluded to as well. But that is it something that felt compatible with your plans as well as a person?
Yeah, it's a good point. My age thing, to be honest, it's something that, honestly, to be quite honest, I've always shied away from mentioning my age. To be honest, I think I've always probably come across a little bit older, and therefore it's one of those things you keep it as a bit of a hidden sort of secret, and
Right,
offer
okay.
it where you
I
can.
wasn't
But
meaning this to be an expose.
not at all, not at all. But no, it's you're absolutely right. I do think you do think about, when is is it an okay time to be, work. I can't tell you how many weeks I've done 70. We've gone to the big R's and we've spoken to clinicians, and I'm sitting there doing 60, 70, 80 patients a week, and just that has been the norm for quite a long time. Now perhaps that's not quite the case, but from a time perspective, I'll still go weeks where I'm doing a 70, 80-hour week. Sometimes I think, oh, that's heavy, So you're right. There comes a point where you go, how sustainable is that? And it's probably not that sustainable, which is probably where my career is now starting to shift a little bit, in the sense of, I can't necessarily sacrifice that amount of time. So things have had to adjust a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely biased on this, and that's why I keep inviting you to disagree, because I don't want you you to have to bandwagon where our stories are shared. But the speed in my 20s, the speed of which, specialising early, so there's familiarity there, but the amount of experience, and especially if you're really reflective, the amount of experience you can get in a short space of time, that's where you're seeing out big chunks of someone's career as quickly as you can. In a contemporary environment with the right mentorship, and that those, if you're working double-hour weeks, if you're working an 80-hour week, it's not sustainable, but also that is literally double time. And that if you are appropriately reflecting on that, and you're not burning yourself out, and that you have an opportunity where that does work well with your lifestyle at that time, that is a way to get ahead and to advance your skills, and not just be busy for busy's sake. And so that's where I think, I remember one point, cheesy as it is, I think I even said it at an interview, which makes me cringe a little bit, but I said the best and worst thing about my CV was my date of birth. It was the best thing because I was proud and people were impressed at what I'd achieved in a relatively short space of time. I clearly wasn't old enough to have been a physio for long, but it was the worst thing in that there was something to be said for years in the game that sometimes would even qualify you for certain roles or positions. I think it's less so now. Obviously, I've been self-employed, independent for a while now, so you can't imagine I've had a job interview for a while. But that definitely was playing a part. And so it's when I asked your age there, definitely wasn't meaning anything by it, but it was
No,
just
yeah,
more that I hope that compatibility is something that people do read into it, and it's something that
yeah.
in many ways. And I was going to ask this question: do you think that some of the having such a diverse portfolio career, especially with the intersections with sport and the travel, is that a young man's game? Do you think?
Yeah, good. I mean, one thing I'll comment to that was the aging. Actually, it's funny because I think I've been very fortunate in terms of networking with you guys and the different people that I've kind of met along my career. I've been so fortunate that I really haven't had to interview. To be honest, a lot of the times it's been a case of someone's known me. How do you fancy this stream of work? We've had a conversation. We've maybe had a meeting. You call it an informal interview, maybe, but I wouldn't say I've had a formalized interview. Whereas perhaps a couple of years ago, before I came into to motorsport, I worked for Pure. And interestingly, that was the first time, one, I had to, I would say, properly interview, and two, they were a company that were quite open about the fact that they really only hired people at a certain level of experience, certain level of clinical practice. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I was extremely kind of proud and kind of felt it was a big milestone for me getting that role. But it was very interesting in this London setting of private work where actually, there was clients coming in expecting someone top of their game, which I felt like I was. But at the same time, there was definitely that thing of, cool, this guy's young. How much have you got behind him? So again, I think it further highlighted what you were saying about actually I really had to show my clinical kind of level much more than perhaps some of my colleagues had to. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Coming on to the diversity, then I guess you were saying about the diversity of the role, and is it a young man's game? I think diversity not so much. I think I'll always try and keep a level of diversity in my practice.
Yeah.
I certainly think the motorsport side of things, I think you could argue is a young man's game. And I think sport as well, I think sport's a tough old slog in a lot of different fields. Motorsport's very unique, I think, but particularly the things like football and things like that, for me, I looked at that as something, yeah, that's definitely something I think for me in the earlier part of my career, I think.
Yeah, because I wonder, because there's some absolutely brilliant therapists of many decades of experience that work well in pro sport and do also manage to carve out a great work-life balance that suits them and their families. So I don't want to sort of paint with too broad a brush, but I just know again that there are certain aspects of it. There's plenty of things that give me. I look on at your work and it gives me all sorts of jealousy and envy from your photographs. But there's certainly elements of it where you'll be sat in airports where I'm glad I'm with me children. There's this funny
Yeah.
situation there where there are these trade-offs, which brings me to that question really, is that what would you say if you had to come up with a few of each? What are the pros and cons of the sort of career that you're leading at the moment?
Yeah, we'll start with the pros first. I mean, the pros for me, definitely at the minute, I love the idea that I'm working around a team of people, particularly at Red Bull, Honda, etc., that are absolutely driven for the best, in the sense that, there's no compromise. If I say this is the best, we get the best, and it's not necessarily financially driven. It's generally driven by results. So that for me is a phenomenal pro, and I love that. I think that was probably some of my frustrations back in the NHS stuff, was that
Right.
trying to deliver what I viewed as clinical excellence, and perhaps time pressures or money or whatever sometimes perhaps got in the way of that. So I think that's a definite pro. I think at the minute, particularly with motorsport, I mean, a huge pro at this point in my career and life is, I'm getting to visit, different parts of the world on a weekly basis, which is fantastic. I'm extremely lucky there. And I think also, I mean, I'm self-employed. I work for myself. I think I'm also very fortunate that I can. This probably come on to one of my cons as well. Is my diary is based around how I set it. If I want Monday morning off, then I can have Monday morning off. But if that's the way inclined you are, I guess that also then, as I say, feeds into my cons. I think, particularly take motorsport, we're in the heat of the season. I have now been away for best part of the last 2 weeks. I'm back for 2 days, then I'm away again for another 2 weeks. I then get 2 weeks off, which is kind of dictated by the sport. We have 3 week shutdown in Formula One, so that holiday's been dictated to me and my family. So that's the time I've got off. It's not a case of that's when we've decided to book it. And then after that, I'm back away again for 3 weeks solid and not touching home. So I think the big cons are definitely time, and the fact, although the diary is my own, when it comes to sport, you're very much dictated by your sport, your fixtures, the athlete or the driver that you're working with. So that's the huge con for me.
How do you
And
manage it?
it's
How do
very,
you manage a home caseload there? Sorry to interrupt.
no, no, not at all.
Because that's something that I can see as being an interesting one as well. Is that if you've got patients in your practices at home?
Yeah, so we're very fortunate. So at Chelmsford Physio, where my clinic's based, we are, well, one, very fortunate. We've got a fairly large team. Also, Brad, my colleague, is also in Formula One, so he looks after Max. I guess it's a really interesting when people again ask me about pro sport. Is I'm very fortunate that a lot of my patients I've seen for a long time. So again, there's a level of I'd like to see Matt, and therefore I'm happy to wait 2 weeks to see him. It's not ideal at times in a private caseload, as I'm sure you know. But so it's a real mixture, to be honest, mate. A bit about understanding my clients and if they're happy to wait or not, and also having a great team behind me in the sense of that I've got some great clinicians where I go, look, while I'm away for 2 weeks, I'd like you to go and see, one of the lads or one of the girls, and see them do this, and then you're backing with me when I'm back. Or it may be you
Yeah.
just have to be really good at managing the diary and hand the patient over.
Yeah, no, for sure. I can imagine that. Yeah, it's certainly if you were talking about really small practice, or if it was just your own and you build up a caseload, and then that has to fluctuate so much with your other work, then that'd be tricky. But no, that sounds like a good balance for sure. And for me as well, I'm so pleased that there's so many people getting the best of you and your skill set at the moment as well. That's the thing. There's an efficiency to getting stuck in and getting your hands on various different things, but also that diversity of role is one of the things that will keep you interested. And I'm so it's been so painful for me when people have ended up having such significant talent but couldn't necessarily carve out a combination of roles that would be sustainable for them and stimulating for them, and so they felt like it was just dragging them down. And so I'm really pleased to see you constantly striving to find that balance. What about the travel? I mean, that definitely comes into it, doesn't it? So what's it's got that's an obvious sort of pros and cons type thing to it, but what does that sometimes, because that can vary, I guess. It's like so. I'm thinking about diary management must be tough anyway, but does it sometimes really get thrown off by um, airports or borders have mattered more than ever in recent years, haven't they, and stuff. So I just wondered
Yeah,
how that's
yeah.
going.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, the only the positive is, I guess, there's a lot of predictability to when we're flying. So we start to get into a routine. So for most of Europe, we'll leave on a Wednesday, back on a Monday. If we're further afield, we'll start to leave on a Tuesday. So there's some predictability to it, which makes my diary management a little bit easier.
Okay.
And also, I've got a lot of time in airports, so it means I can still keep in contact. So it's definitely shifted the way I communicate with my patients in the sense of much more now is emails, texts, etc., phone calls, where actually I think
Right.
patients really appreciate that. And that's one of the novelties of motorsport, I guess, is sometimes my patients are quite wooed by the fact, you're calling them from a racetrack and they're like, this is great. And you can you can buy
Sure.
yourself a bit of time on that front as well. But it's
Sure.
it's definitely it's definitely challenging.
Yeah.
And particularly, I think just for trying to get the work-life balance again, that's one of the big things I found in motorsport is that really trying to carve out time for yourself is so much more important, because although you might be away and have downtime when you're away, it's not true rest. You come back pretty exhausted, and it's much more of a 24-hour role. I'm with my
Gotcha.
driver from the minute I wake up to the minute we go to sleep. So I found that getting that downtime for me has been a much more important thing.
Brilliant. No, I can make sense of that for sure. I can't help but spend a few minutes on the specifics, because ever since I've known you to be a bit of a petrol head, and so it can't be an accident that you've ended up in motorsport. So talk to me a bit about the role. Give us all a clue as to what that might look like, because to some people that are a bit ignorant to motorsport, they think, well, what do they even need a physio for anyway? They're just driving a car around, which of course is naive. But what's it entail?
Yeah, so the role itself comes under as a performance coach physio. So I always split my role into kind of two sections. The split into the glamorous bit, which is the weekend bit, so the bit where everyone sees you at the racetrack. So for the racetrack weekend, your performance coach head goes on much more. So for me, that is I drive the driver to and from the track. I'll check us into hotels. I'll set our routines for the day. When are we eating? When are we sleeping, etc. At the racetrack, I'll get all the driver's kit ready. And then I'm also the person that when you see the driver walking to the grid, I've got his helmet, I've got his water bottles, spare bits of gear that he may need in the car. I always try and say to people that if you think about the engineers are there on the racetrack to make sure the car is ready to go, I'm there to make sure not only is the driver ready to go, but to cover any situations that may, occur. Let's say it was beautifully sunny and now it's raining. Right? Have I got a spare helmet? Have I got his water bottle? Have I got his, whatever it may be? So that's kind of my trackside role of a weekend. Away from the track, it's probably more the physio, again, kind of PT side of things, which is more, say today, for example, we're here at Red Bull HQ. So today we're doing workout sessions, a little bit of maintenance, managing any injuries we may have. So kind of planning more, how do we develop? In the bigger picture of things, that's maybe making sure that we're maintaining fitness during the season. And then when we've got larger gaps in the season, we may be then looking to improve on a certain aspect of performance, be that strength, endurance, whatever it might be. So they're the kind of two parts of the role. But I think the interesting thing where we've had to perhaps develop my skills more is, we're still looking at the psychology, nutrition. We've got a lot of support, more specifically from Red Bull if we need it, but we still, we're managing the bulk of it. So I guess it's just making sure I'm supporting that athlete. The interesting thing, I guess, is it's one athlete. I look after one driver, although I'll have feed back into other areas of Red Bull's performance program. I manage that one guy. So that's always, there's definitely a huge relationship element there as well.
Yeah, and that's something that even in teams, even in more broad team sport and football included, that people say that those relationships are key. But when it's a one-to-one, I've spoken to many sort of tennis physio, golf physios, are the classics there. They say about how that is something that's a constant negotiation, like it would in any relationship of any sort. And so, fair play. That sounds really interesting, and so it lights me up to hear you talk about it because it's such a good fit for you as a person as well. I can so see it being so interesting because you've always been interested in helping people do interesting things with their bodies, regardless of what that was. So motorsport and gymnastics, where you've got one that's sort of withstanding G-forces and more asymmetric than most sports, and then you've got the quite opposite with gymnastics is about as mobile as it gets. But you just seem to thrive on like, what is the task? And then you never separated off. And I went through a real journey on this in my career. I was over dichotomizing pain and performance, injury management and performance, whereas I never sensed that from you, and it seems to be something that dovetails really well. Am I intuiting that well? Like, do you find that that it's easy enough for you to adjust those hats?
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I think you always have your biases, like you say. I mean, particularly, right. I think, I think where I was lucky, I mean, the gymnastics was such a great feeder in the sense of gymnastics was a real new sport for me. You're right. I'm a massive petrolhead. So coming into the Formula One world felt really natural, as much as it was extremely exciting at the time. The gymnastic stuff for me was just such a great kind of foundation in terms of just learning how to keep these athletes going because their schedules were tight. They had limited resources. It was a real kind of, for me, it was a great foundation to kind of, keep my physio head on in the sense of like, rest, recovery, loading, etc. But then also apply it to we really do need to perform in a few weeks or days or hours or whatever it might be. So you're right. I had my biases, and I think that you had to, you had to put them aside. Where I found it's more apt actually, Jack, is now in the motorsport world. Physios aren't actually a big prominent force. There's a lot more kind of PT background individuals. So that's been really interesting because it can be very easy perhaps to move feel like you have to put your biases to the side, but actually what you then start to realize is they're looking for your kind of USP in terms of applying it to a driver. So it's been much more apt in motorsport, actually having your own niche, sticking to what you know and kind of putting your stamp on things, but being adaptable because you're learning a lot from a lot of different industries, which perhaps I didn't quite get so much before.
No, brilliant. I can imagine. I can see that. And it's nice that there's some breadth in access to those roles and you've been able to then know your own scope of practice, how you're applying it. And then the goals are the goals, right? Help that person get that car around that track as quick as they can and develop their own sort of career and for the betterment of the brand as well. It's always an interesting angle as well. And you're someone that's, appropriately commercially minded as well. It's been another thing that's been really good to watch is that those things matter, the optics and understanding how to make sure that those relationships are managed so that then everyone wins, and that's brilliant too. We've got to finish with a bit of a would you recommend it type conversation, or what would be the advice you give? Because I bet you're asked on a regular basis. So when people are coming through, if they look on at any part of the career that we've talked about, or particularly even on the motorsport side, what would you recommend to someone that wants to aspire to get that breadth that you have?
I would always say don't lose sight of what makes you happy. And I mean that in the broadest possible sense. For me, when I've ever looked at any career role, it's got to be exciting. Does it get you out of bed in the morning? ultimately, I think there's got to be a financial head on, which I think physios are really uncomfortable talking about. Is does it financially support you in the way that you want it to? And ultimately, like, what are your goals? Does it add a bit of a jigsaw into what you kind of, piece of the jigsaw in terms of what you want to do in the long term? So I think I would recommend what I've done it, but it's not for everyone. And I can see how actually, people, I think they see the glamorous bit or they see the Instagram photos, you're right, and kind of jump on the bandwagon. But I think ultimately it's just making sure that you find work that ticks a lot of boxes, because it doesn't always have to be glamorous necessarily to make you really happy. So I think, sort of analyzing it like that is probably the best way in terms of deciding whether it's the right way or right path for you.
Yeah, no, it's a great shout, and certainly for me looking on, I'd say to anyone that the reason that Matt's someone that would be smart to emulate in style is that enthusiasm, saying yes but not for the sake of it. Making sure it was always with a goal in mind, extracting information and networking appropriately, not in a schmoozy way. God, there's been some people that have come through that have been trying to use things for leverage and stuff, and it's just like it's so transparent, it's so obvious. Whereas actually asking questions and trying to take opportunities, but then also when given them, grabbing them with both hands and wanting to prove themselves, that hunger is something that is going to get you ahead. And so you've been an absolute inspiration to many. You will continue to be. I know it sounds cheesy, mate, but I'm so proud of you. It's just unbelievable. It's an absolute pleasure to know you. And similarly, give my best to Brad as well. Another cracker of a physio that many of you should, and also make sure I've been meaning to get him on the show. So if you can drop him an elbow and
I'll give him a nudge.
tell him that I want to chat to him as well, because you both of you, it's been so exciting to see, and it's great to have these different options that people can look onto as we start to really broaden the horizons of what it means to do what you're going to do with your physio career, and so you're great examples of that. So thanks a lot, mate. Really appreciate it. Where can people find out more about you, etc.?
Yeah, brilliant. So my Instagram and Twitter, both at Physio MMD, and also obviously in our clinic, which is Chelmsford Physio. So give either a follow, that'd be grand, or on our website, that'd be fantastic. But yeah, that's the best place to kind of get any more info, get in contact, or any details.
Superb. My favourite thing to signpost people to when they ask me out about Matt is his biography on the Physio Matters website. If you go on there,
I knew you'd say that.
It's like one of my favourite jokes that we've ever made. So please do. I won't do any spoilers on there. So you go and have a look at that and enjoy that biography of Matt. We weren't on paper a good match, me and Matt. He's got a hyphenated surname. He's always got his ankles hanging out at the bottom of his jeans. But we've made it, and we're still friends. So that's a good sign in itself. Take care, mate. Have a great
Thanks,
day.
mate.
Have a great week, and we'll speak soon.
Cheers for having us. Thanks, Jack.
Yeah, take care, buddy. Ta-ra.